It is Global Order. I'm Hindol Sengupta. I'm absolutely delighted that General Raj Shukla has joined me in this conversation. The General is a prolific commentator on all things security and international relations. He's widely considered as one of the best voices from India commenting on international security. General, welcome.
Thanks, Hindol. Great pleasure to be back with you. How have you been?
General, I want to begin by asking you, let's take the issue that has most plagued us in the last 24 to 48 hours, which is really what's happening in Pakistan. And that's why I want to begin with that. Talk to me a little bit about how you see the Baloch situation, because in many commentators' minds and many historian minds, this is a new escalation as far as the Baloch Liberation Army is concerned. However, some people also point out that there was actually a much worse situation in Pakistan in 2009, which was when they were seeing bomb blasts in every other city, every other day or so it seemed. And it sort of crawled back from that low. So, therefore, perhaps there is a way back from this too. But in some senses, this also marks, this new escalation also marks, in a sense, the beginning of the demise of CPEC. How do you see it?
Well, the first point that you made, it's not the first time that, rail movement in that area of Quetta has been targeted by the BLA. If I'm not mistaken, there have been 3-4 instances in the past. The 2009 incident that you refer to was also pretty bad. But it points to two things. If Pakistan has not been able to crawl out of the despair of 2009, it's hardly any consolation. And why this may be worse, it's not exactly clear at this point as to which narrative is right. Is it the ISPR narrative or the BLA claim where they have the latter claims to have killed those 214 Pak soldiers? If that has happened, it is particularly gruesome and a huge challenge to the Pak state. So that will depend on when the true facts come out. But the larger point that I wish to make is this: that look at Pakistan. If you actually ask me, in India's strategic calculus, it was never a threat. It was just a pest. We have far bigger and more serious threats. But what they have done to themselves is, particularly, shall we say, bad for them. One can only pity them, because the most serious problem here is that this attempt of the Pak army to run the political narrative, either by running it from behind the curtains or from the front, that is not working. Because if these challenges to the Pakistani state, either in Balochistan or in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, have to be sorted out, it has to come from political capital. And not that I'm a big fan of Imran Khan, but at the moment, he's the only one who seems to have the political capital in terms of, popularity and the electoral mandate to be able to address these larger challenges. The other contender, Nawaz Sharif, seems to have lost it. And the Pak army on its own is unable to do so. So that really is the big challenge. And of course, it has been intensified by the support coming from the Afghan Taliban across the nexus between them and the Pakistan, or the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, and the arms that the Americans left behind. So it's a really worrisome cocktail. And the man who should be most worried, if he's honest, is Asim Munir. Because the Pakistan army, it was once, I wouldn't say respected, but it was at least held in awe. That awe seems to be disappearing. The challenges to the Pak states in terms of separatism are mounting. And even the Chinese cannot rescue them, because unless you have a basic law and order going, the CPEC is not going to take off. So it may be good news for India, but it is awful news for Pakistan, and I can only pity them at this juncture.
That's exactly the point, General. CPEC, which was one of the most important portions of China's Belt and Road Initiative, connecting Xinjiang to Gwadar. Now, Gwadar, where a major international airport has been built, but nothing really happens there. And despite a lot of effort and a lot of money from the Chinese, CPEC has not taken off because it cuts through Balochistan. You will remember, there was a point a few years ago where there was a lot of talk that there's a lot of minerals under the ground in Balochistan, will in fact be extracted, including the famous Rakodek mines, which supposedly has a lot of gold, via Chinese transportation systems or supply chains, via Gwadar, and sent around the world. All of these dreams today seem like pipe dreams. Now, the other question is, it's not just Balochistan, as you of course pointed out. It's also Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. It's also Sindh, parts of it which are restive. So, talk to me a little bit about where you see the future of the Pakistani state go from here. Is it destined to be one day merely, part of Punjab ruled by blustering Punjabis?
I mean, you see, the problems in Sindh, I think, are still simmering below the surface. They haven't come to the forefront. And I think that's because of Mr. Zardari, because his hold on the Sindh province, and he doesn't seem to be a separatist in that mood. But Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa are particularly worrying because the split of the state doesn't seem to run, and the strong arm tactics of the Pakistan army are not working. They will not work. I mean, I can tell you, I've spent 4 decades in the army. The army can, or these, strong arm tactics can only work if there is some political capital. And here, what the Pakistan army has done, that if it doesn't let any political capital surface, I mean, who will engage with these, Fiziperist tendencies? And I mean, if I were to speak from the Pak perspective, the only person on the horizon is Imran Khan, because he may have committed some errors against the Pak army, but he remains hugely popular. And if you lock him up, where is the political capital? And I don't see anybody else. I mean, I thought a lot of Nawaz, but Nawaz seems to have lost it, as it was evident during the last elections. The CPEC, is an economic opportunity, but for years, I mean, Nawaz did try to put his political might behind the CPEC. When Imran came, he had some problems with it. Then it was first mired in corruption. That corruption too was led by Pakistani generals who were heading the CPEC. And now the issue is not of CPEC, doing any good, because how can it do any good if there is no security? So, I mean, at the end of the day, the Pakistani state is struggling to survive. How will it ever thrive? So that seems to be the biggest question, and these Fiziperist tendencies are a huge challenge. And if the BLA can do what it has done and get away with it, I mean, Asim Munir and his generals need to do some very, very serious introspection. Or this, breakaway thing, which was once a fantasy, or not a fantasy, but a probability, now seems to be becoming a reality. It is indeed serious.
There was also some hope in some quarters in Pakistan that the Chinese will help them counter this. In fact, building the CPEC through Balochistan was touted as this, killing two birds with one stone, so to speak. It would bring a certain amount of fiscal prosperity, should I say, to the region, and indeed, therefore, would curb these vociferous tendencies. But the Chinese today, as it looks like, they are not going to, they've already lost people. Chinese people have died in these clashes a number of times. There is no way China is going to put boots on the ground to fight this. And whatever money that was coming also seems to be drying up, General.
In fact, in the larger sense, Hindol, that is the true test of Chinese power. As its global profile grows, we see that while it is, pretty free with its treasure, it is not going to shed blood, which means that a point will come when, for Chinese power to sustain, it will have to put its military on the ground, boots on the ground, and that is when the true test will come. And for the moment, I see no signs of the Chinese willing to do that, either in Pakistan or elsewhere where their interests are, or even in the first island chain. Even in Taiwan, while they are growing capacity, and that capacity is really worrisome, because if you listen to what Admiral Paparo, the CNCI PACOM, said just 3 weeks back, those exercises are becoming so huge and so sophisticated that he says they are no longer exercises, but they are rehearsals for attack. So, I mean, China, as far as capacity building, posturing, the economic levers, BRI, all that is happening, but it is not ready to shed blood, and certainly not in Pakistan. So, I mean, in that sense, it is not a very good ally to have.
Let's zoom out a little bit from the Pakistan situation, General, to what's developing in Ukraine after the negotiations that Donald Trump is trying to push on Ukraine and Russia. Latest news suggests that Putin, in a sense, has accepted some of the terms, but he has rather difficult terms of his own. I want to talk to you a little bit about something you were mentioning on Twitter the other day on how a new structure of the world order might be emerging, where from G2, which we used to talk about at one point, American bloc and a Chinese bloc, so to speak, there could even be a G3. But what will that G3 look like? Where does India stand in this entire equation? Talk to us a little bit about that.
I know that was just a random thought, but um, I tell you why I tweeted in that fashion. As I look at the Trump phenomena and the Trumpian world, it does seem to me to be a foreign policy and strategic challenge for the whole world. Because I mean, whatever you call it, whether it is a transforming world order or it's a renegade world order, it is something that we haven't seen in the past. And here I've been, saying on various platforms for a while that there is a lot of serious policy thinking by some very fine minds behind what Trump is doing. And while we may not agree with all that they say, all that they do, it would be unwise to dismiss it, as an outlandish maverick up to some tricks. There is deep thought behind. And of course, it is transactional or very real worldish. I mean, Trump believes in the dictum that he who pays the piper calls the tunes. And if America is dishing out this money all over the world, they should call the tune. But what I would urge the Indian strategic establishment to do, and I'm sure they're already doing it, but if I may just reinforce the point, we must look at Trump with a fresh pair of lenses, not to comply with what he says, but to understand the drivers and the impulses. Because I think it's a very sophisticated response, and for 2 to 3 reasons. Trump's advisors, the MAGA team, I think, has concluded that this is an unparalleled moment in history. And it is unparalleled because, in my understanding, never before have US and China been powerful together. When the USA was founded in 1776, I think China was the foremost economy and the foremost civilization, though it was not a global power, but it was a pretty strong country, the strongest in the world. And then, for various reasons, we know, the imperialist assault in the century of humiliation, China declined while the Americans rose to superpowerhood. And if you just see through these 200 years, American power has remained constant, at least in terms of, 5% of population contributing to 25% of the GDP and owning 50% of the global military resources. But what has happened in least recent times, and here is where Trump steps in and he blames the previous administrations, that they have been callous in not only responding to Chinese power, but also in terms of how they have structured their economy. Look at this, they have a debt of $36 trillion, which means the debt servicing is $1 trillion. And there is a law of the economist Ferguson who says, whenever the debt servicing exceeds the defense budget, it is the decline of great powers. He has quotes many examples from history, most notoriously Britain. So that is a serious challenge which the Trump world recognizes. And what should worry us is that they are doing serious course corrections in terms of, Dodge, asking the world to share the defense burden. Look at the $2 trillion trade deficit. When the Commerce Secretary, from the American point of view, argues, he's right. And all these measures that are being taken, to equalize these tariffs is to reduce that trade deficit. He is saying what was, I used to always wonder how can the Americans live off some such debt? And we were told, no, the American dollar and American exceptionalism. The Commerce Secretary and Trump are saying, no, you cannot live off debt. And so you have to correct it. So the correction of the unfair tariffs and the larger economic view is also this, that the tariffs will be a source of revenue. They will perhaps, I'm not sure, they will perhaps push factories and jobs back to USA. And ultimately, it is that world of, getting the American dream back, abolishing income tax, these $5 billion gold cards. So if you come to USA, there will be no regulation. You can do business, not pay income tax, so on and so forth. And now let's come to the national security piece. In my mind, they have concluded that China today is so potent, it is not worth a fight. This is exactly what Papado is saying. I mean, now what we are seeing in Taiwan are rehearsals for an attack. And the Americans are trying to balance their power and their commitment. They find their military industrial complex in a big mess. They want to rebuild the military and rebuild the military industrial complex. So they are saying, don't fight the Chinese at this point, but retreat to your corner. Look at the military industrial complex. The Americans don't have 7 days of munitions and missiles for a fight in Taiwan. So how are you going to fight? While the Chinese are building 10,000 cruise missiles a week. Somebody said the world is an ocean, and America of all nations has too few ships for a fight. A single Chinese state-owned shipbuilder today produces more commercial and military vessels by tonnage than the US industry since World War II. This is very serious stuff. So how will the Americans fight? And therefore, we have these three schools emerging in the MAGA movement. One is the premises like Pompeo, who say, no, we still need a global military to roam the world, and therefore he's not found favor with Trump. Now, the two people to be watched are what they say, the prioritizers like Colby, who say wind up the fight in Ukraine and Middle East and focus on the first island chain, and Vance, who's a restrainer, which says, no, this is not the time to fight, retreat to your corner, rebuild your capacities and come back. If you followed the Elbridge Colby confirmation hearing, and he's most likely to be the Undersecretary, I think, for Policy for Defense, is going to call the shots in all these areas, he nuanced his arguments in two ways. He said, Taiwan is not a treaty ally. We will come to their aid militarily only if they hike their defense budget to 10% of GDP, which is not easy. 10%. Even with treaty allies like Taiwan, they have qualified it by saying, yeah, treaty allies, we'll come to your aid, but hike your defense budget to 3%. I'm told that's what Trump told the Japanese Prime Minister when he visited, told him privately. So look at this business. They are saying that, please, we are not going to carry your defense burdens, which means the Americans may not come to the aid of Taiwan. Now it could have, grave implications on American power and its, what it does to its alliances. So it may not happen ultimately, but these are all thoughts in the air. And based on this, there is this Vance school of thought, which is talking of these three ecospheres. China led Asia, Russia led Europe, and an American led Western Hemisphere. And there, Americans mean business, all that stuff about Greenland and, Greenland, Canada, from the strategic point of view, makes a lot of sense. It allows the Americans to extend directly to the Arctic. And here the thought is that they will do trade with the Russians through the Arctic when those alternate routes develop and they'll have those minerals. And it could also be a gambit to pull away the Russians from the Chinese. Now, it will not be so simplistic because Lavrov just 2 days back said that their relationship with China is too strong. But these are, all thoughts in the air, the probability of doing a reverse Nixon, getting the Russians away from the Chinese. But I would just like to make, one more point. They're serious about a lot of stuff like that Panama Canal. Now I'm told BlackRock has made a bid to buy the two ports at the extremities. And yesterday, the US military has been told to work plans to take the Panama Canal by force. So these are all, attempts of the Trump administration to look within, correct what is wrong within, correct what has gone wrong in trade and economics, rebuild the military, and assert American power. So to me, it doesn't seem to be all that irrational. It may not be, very much in tune with what the metrics of the previous world order were. But here is Trump and his new world order. Just yesterday, we had Mr. Jaishankar saying that the virtues of the old order are exaggerated. So perhaps even the Indians are getting around to this view that there is merit in what Trump is saying and doing. I know I may be off the mark, but these are just some thoughts going to my head, and I thought I'll share them with you and your viewers.
Two or three points emerge from what you just said, General. One is for a long time, there was this concern expressed in private by many people that one of the concerns that the old American administration had was India will one day choose, and especially Modi, under Modi, India will one day choose to essentially crack a deal with China, thrash out a deal with China. And these two big Asian powers coming together, in a sense, would be a challenge for America. And that's not what America would ever want. That was the old understanding. Then a new understanding began to emerge that perhaps in a G2 world, America would do better to push India under the broad Chinese umbrella, so to speak, as you said, Asia dominated by China, so to speak. And now, of course, you're talking about a third sort of plane here, which is a Eurasia, so to speak, dominated by Russia. Now, there are questions on whether Russia really wants. How close does Russia really want to go to China, towards China? Because the Russians also have the apprehensions of going too much under the Chinese umbrella or the shadow. Where does all of this leave India, in your opinion?
So, here the geopolitics gets very, very complicated. For example, the Russians, of course, have been steadfast allies or steadfast partners of India. They have stood us in very good stead in many crises in the past. But I would like you to reflect on the fact that the Russians have been pretty good to the Chinese too. The entire, what shall I say, upgradation of the PLA has been largely because of the Russians. And that fact should not be, lost sight of. They've held them to build their submarines, their missiles, their aerospace instruments, so on and so forth. So the Russians have been pretty good to the Chinese too, though they've had their problems. They've had problems in their relationship with China. And most importantly, in Ukraine, the Chinese have been very good to the Russians. Without Chinese chips, which go into everything from drones to hypersonics and the CNC equipment and so on and so forth, oil, energy, the Russians would not be in the fight. So that is, one factor. Now, the Sino-Indian factor, what you said, I mean, India may not be wanting to do an alliance with China against USA, but we're certainly looking for, friendship with China. Prime Minister Modi met Xi 18 times. Political capital didn't work. Political deterrence didn't work. Diplomatic, if you spoke to any diplomat prior to Galwan, he would have told you that these agreements cannot be broken. I mean, they all had great faith in these agreements. And some very respected minds, Nirupama Rao, Shivshankar Menon. And there you have one day all those agreements just lying in tatters. So why the Chinese did it is particularly unwise. And that has destroyed, for a while, any hope of an entente between China and India. If I were in Beijing and America was my serious competitor, I would reach out to the Indians. So I see no serious reason why the Chinese should keep the Indians at bay and apply military coercion as they did in Galwan. What should also worry us is, if you see the readout which came out of Kazan when the Prime Minister of Xi met, to put together this temporary kind of truce along the LAC. The Indians talk of a multipolar world and a multipolar Asia. The Chinese refer to a multipolar world and keep quiet on Asia. So to me, it seems the only reason is that they look at India from the balance of power perspective, which says one tiger on a hill, and only there can be only one power in Asia, and therefore it seems to me that it is a fight to the finish. And the only thing that can, I put it this way: India and China, these numbers, one and three economies in PPP terms, in close proximity, perhaps two economies. I don't think ever in history have two economies so powerful grown in close proximity. So the geostrategic trajectories are bound to clash. The only way to keep that clash peaceful is through deterrence. And here I think India needs to step up its game in terms of defense spending, in terms of reforms, because the Chinese military is a real potent threat. Look at, I'll give you one metric. Z seems to be saying that the economic slowdown notwithstanding, the technological and military push will continue. If you see the last budget, the expenditure on technology by the Chinese goes up by 8.1%, the military by 7.2%, education by 6.1%, and health and social spending by 5%. It is determined to become a technology superpower. Look what's happening with the Chinese in the world of industrial robots, humanoids. I mean, I'm amazed. I thought the Americans were ahead of the Chinese in chips. Yesterday, I read that by 2030, 45% of the chips will come from China and only 15% from the USA. What is particularly worrying about the deep seek is not only, the costs going down and the fact that they worked on Russian old ships, but of the 211 people who were associated with deep sea, 60% of them have never stepped out of China. So they are not the returnees from American universities. This is the best and the brightest in China. And now it is pretty evident that how it works there on their military civil fusion philosophy is that when these companies are, in their infancy, the military handholds them. It handholds them to commercial viability and handholds them in terms of destroying adversary competition. Look at that. That is why the Chinese companies are so robust in global markets. The PLA Academy of Sciences has, of course, done a great deal of stuff in, in ensuring China's technological lead, but it has also churned out 2,000 globally competitive commercial companies. So the linkage between R&D and commerce is so good. And I don't know whether on your show I've made this metric, but I just want to reiterate it. Look what's happened. ASPE puts out a critical and emerging technology tracker. 2003 to 2007, the Americans lead in 60 out of 65 technologies. There is not a close second. And then the Chinese have this diaspora strategy, 1,000 talents plan, military civil fusion. And 2019 to 2023, they lead in 57 out of 65. Mind-boggling. What a dramatic inversion in technology leadership. And I thought the Americans were ahead in chips, but now the news in chips is not too good. So China is innovating. It has stopped copying. That should, really worry us. And so that's how I look at this. And one last point. So now that we know what the Trump reality is, I think we should make strategic adjustments to the new reality. And the way to do that is perhaps to smarten up. Look at this tariff. These tariffs are in the news. Now, there will be some sectors of the Indian economy which will certainly need to be protected. But I ask, why can't the Tatas compete with the Americans in the free market? Why do they need tariffs? Why do big business need to be protected? When will they get? And here the question is to them and not to the government. Because if the government is forced to protect big business, then we lose our leverages. And in the Trump world, the grand bargaining will be done on, real issues and facts. We will not get away with this bit of, because we are a what shall we say, a foil for the Chinese. They will relax some tariffs. I think they are pretty serious on these tariffs. They are not going to get rolled back. So we have to see what grand bargain we can do between rationalization of tariffs and market access, which is our strong point, and defense and deep technologies is what we need. So if we can do some bargaining on tariffs and get deep technologies, it will help to reinvigorate our industrial base, which will make us more competitive in trade and all these areas. And here in the last visit, we had this compact catalyzing opportunities for military partnerships, accelerated commerce and technology, a 10-year framework for the US defense, India defense partnership. These are, I think, opportunities for us to seriously tell the Americans that we need your aid in certain things like AI enablement, quantum capacity, space, military autonomy. Here, help us, and we will be a little more reasonable on the tariffs. Look at space. I mean, if Starlinks is coming to India for commerce, where we need a Starlinks kind of system is more along the LAC. Persistent surveillance is so important. So either we have our own Agnikurs and Skyroutes doing that, or we plug into this deal to tell Starlinks to help Agnikul and Skyroute to put up the military configuration along the LAC. So here some smart bargaining can be done. I'm sure it is being done. But two things. We'll have to recognize the Trump reality. It is not fluff. It has been carefully thought through. We may have our disagreements. Make strategic adjustments to the new reality. It's an opportunity to smarten up, see what is wrong within. And diplomatic finesse will lie in how we can get this grand bargain together. So if I may just sum up by saying this, that we are in a new world where you have this competition between a challenged hegemon USA, it's a challenge declining, a very potent rising challenger China, and this aspiring Vishwabandhu India. And here we have to step up our game. Where we really need to step up our game is in technology, industrial capacities, in the strategic military sphere. Because Trump, Matt Pottinger is, I think he was one of his advisors in the first term. He anecdotally puts it across very well. He says, whenever Trump would visit any country and all those briefs were put up to him, he would just put them away and say, tell me three things. What is the trade balance? How much does this country spend on defense? And what are the cards I have and they have? So Trump is going to deal with you on these three metrics. If you are not strong in defense, he's not going to respect you. If you're not strong as a power, he's not going to respect you. Here, there was one piece of good news. His advisors, I think it was Elbridge Colby or somebody, I'm not sure. Their big disappointment with Europe is they call them pathetic dependencies. That you're unwilling to share the defense burden and you are screwing us on trade. And I'm quoting Trump. And India was referred to as an autonomous strategic partner, which means somebody who is willing to stand up to the Chinese, who's not, begging for aid, who's just looking for a little bit of help, but is willing to stand up. If that is the true view of India in the Trump administration, it could be an opportunity and good news for us.
I have two questions, General. Number one, the first part of what you said, we are once again in a deeply militarizing world. You spoke about Japan, you spoke about other parts of the world. Today, every part of the world now will reconsider their defense budgets, reconsider whether acquiring nuclear weapons is important for them or not. Some parts of the world will also look at Ukraine and think, well, what's the difference between Ukraine and North Korea? North Korea has nuclear weapons. All of these questions, perhaps some rightly, some wrongly, are emerging around the world. Now, in this deeply militarizing world, no doubt this militarization will come to India's neighborhood or is already in India's neighborhood too. You see the conversation that's happening in Bangladesh, for instance, in some parts in Sri Lanka and so on and so forth. Where does India stand, or how should India look at this environment? That's number one. Number two, in the whole Trumpian worldview, let me ask you a sort of a bit of a tangential question, which is that at the end of the day, some may say Trump is only 4 more years. He cannot remain in power beyond that. And once Trump leaves office, there will be a whole new, American thinking. There might be a whole new way of American thinking once again. How much should we really focus on what Trump is doing? Because at the end of the day, this is his last term.
So let me take the second question first, Hindal. So it's a very interesting question, but it is based on the presumption that what Trump thinks is very different from what the rest of America thinks. But what if I posit to you that Trump is thinking exactly what the rest of America is thinking? When Trump won the election, I recall an article by the very talented MJ Akbar, and he said, the tragedy was that while Kamala was the Princess of Washington, Trump's mind lived in the real America. Dodge has the popular endorsement of the American people. Look at the waste in Dodge. I mean, somebody was telling me that a Pentagon general told Elon Musk that the Pentagon was built in 18 months. Today, to repair a staircase in Pentagon, it takes 36 months. It is these kind of inefficiencies which stepped into the system. And I truly believe that, for these reasons, such a vibrant democracy like America degenerated into this bureaucracy. And we need to see, even India needs to have a look at its bureaucracy, its outputs, because if you're less than honest about these things, they come to haunt you. So that's the point. If the Trumpian thinking is aligned with much of America, it's going to go beyond these 2 years. What Trump is trying to do, I think, is that in these 2 years, bring in such huge transformation that it cannot be turned back when people begin to see the benefits of the transformation. I mean, who will have a problem with efficiencies? Who will have a problem with less bureaucracies? Who will have a problem with deregulation? I mean, for all his maverick stuff, this is what he's doing. When look at he's absolutely right about the Europeans. When I was a colonel or a brigadier and you would meet these Europeans, they would mock at national security. They would, when they were asked to give troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, these Germans or somebody said, we don't patrol by night. I mean, are you joking? So militaries patrol by day. When they were asked to give troops, they said, take dogs. It was this contempt for national security. And I really wonder how the richest cohort in the world, the Europeans, prosperous, with fine minds, could be so foolish when it came to national security. And now look at the way they are being humiliated. They were not prepared to increase defense spending by 1 percentage point. And now everybody is talking of 5%, 6%. The Chancellor to be Merz is talking of a European nuclear deterrent, rearming Germany. Where was this wisdom before Trump came? Why blame Trump for injecting into you the wisdom that you yourself should have had? Now, I'm not advocating a militarized world, but what I would, place before you is this. In 1990, when Bill Clinton said it's the economy is stupid, he was perhaps right. He was trying to say that, at the end of the day, it is the economy that matters. But economists and strategic thinkers took that to one extreme. They seemed to conclude that national security didn't matter at all. Look at how innocent the Ukrainians were. 1994, they hand over 1,900 nuclear warheads, 44 strategic bombers to Russia, and they traded for independence. And now their existence is at stake. So when Swami Vivekananda says that the world is a gymnasium where nations come to make themselves strong, all I say is that, of course, economy matters, social spending matters, but it must be balanced with national security, not to militarize or to attack, but to deter. I, in the Indian case, also argue that we need to strengthen our deterrence so that we don't need to war fight. And here, I've been making these appeals for a while. Our economists need to find money for defense spending. If If the military component of the power differential with China is $450 billion year on year, there are limits to valor. Will it be wiser for India to spend $500 billion over, say, 8 years now and strengthen your deterrence, or let deterrence break and then spend more on war fighting? In 1962, our GDP was similar to that of China. Our per capita GDP was higher. I am just pointing out to the ill effects of being negligent of national security. And here geopolitics is brutal. It spares nobody. It is particularly brutal on those who are disrespectful or innocent of national security. Look at what's happened to the Americans. I've given you these figures: 7 days of missiles, munitions in Taiwan because they have neglected the military-industrial complex. So the reality of the world is, of course, economics matters, social spending and all that, but you have to find the money. And here our economists need to find the money and say that this is what we must spend in defense, because deterrence may be costly, but wars are costlier.
Well, I want to ask you, I'm so glad that you concluded on this note in your last answer, General, because I want to ask you a question. But before that, something you said reminded me of this episode of when you said the Pentagon. You had been told that the Pentagon was built in 18 months and now it takes 36 months to repair a staircase. I was reminded of this episode. And then, of course, the Germans didn't want to go on patrol in the night. I was reminded of episode of Yes, Prime Minister, where there's this wonderful episode where they say that there's no use of getting the European armies in because the Belgians want to go home over the weekend, and therefore there's no point getting them in. But I want to ask you,
a very serious one. Air Marshal Rajesh was telling me that they've gone on an exercise with the Europeans in some air base in Europe,
yeah,
and on the weekends they would just vacate their bases. And they asked us to vacate our bases, and we said, no, we can't leave our fighters. This is not the done thing. We stay on the base. So, the American GI would refer to NATO in Iraq and Afghanistan as no action, talk only. They had become civilians in uniform. And the point is not this. They had started mocking national security. There was contempt for national security based on this silly premise that, Europe has embraced peace forever. They will be prosperous. They will be wealthy. And it is the silly and the poor Africans and Asians that fight. It came from this hubris. And look what's happening now. So while I won't take delight in what's happening in Ukraine and in Europe, it is a consequence of, neglecting wisdom. And once again, look at the wisdom of Chanakya, who says, "Agar shastra ko bhuloge, तो अपनी संस्कृति खो दोगे, शस्त्र का त्याग करोगे तो राष्ट्र ही खो दोगे." He is making a case to sensibly position your instrument of force in your strategic calculus. How wise? How wise?
Quite right, indeed. Therefore, I want to ask you a bit of a question that comes up from time to time, and there are different points of views. It's a point that Bharat Karnat, for instance, makes again and again. 2 points, because you spoke about how important our deterrence needs to be. There is a question on how much did we really test in 1998 and how effective were those tests. That's number one. And number two, is there reason to believe today, General, that there is need for further nuclear testing as far as India is concerned, and there is an urgent need to build a permanent deterrence with China by building a megaton bomb? Where do you stand on these two things?
I must first say one thing about Bharat. Bharat is 3 leaps ahead of India's national security thinking. What he says today comes true tomorrow. We must concede that. He for years was saying Pakistan is a pest, China is a threat. It took us Galwan to rebalance. His thinking is ahead of all of us. We must concede in that sense. He is a real gem. And the tragedy is that we dismiss him as a hawk. He is not a hawk, a very reasoned man. If you read his first book, Nuclear Weapons, he's connected our ancient wisdom to our modern security challenges. When he talks of Sam Dam Dand Bhed from the Yuddha Kundam. He says, it is in the strategic foreign policy sense, national interest by means fair or foul. We have learned that today. In so many ways, he's ahead of, and so at least the young minds, I would say, you must seriously read him, seriously study him. He's genuinely ahead of our in thinking, and it is a somewhat of a tragedy that we dismiss him as a hawk. He's not. He's pretty ahead of thinking in national security matters. Insofar as the nuclear posture is concerned, see, I followed this debate very closely when and many others followed this debate about testing. Now, there it is Bharat's word versus the word of our scientific establishment. Now, since I have no insider knowledge, it would not be appropriate for me to comment one way or the other. But I mean, you can go. Bharat has written extensively about it. The scientists have responded, and so it's whom you believe. Even Mr. Brajesh Mishra, the former national security advisor, had a lot to say on this. But the larger point about the nuclear posture, I seriously think we need to revisit our nuclear posture for two reasons. One is that the Chinese have really grown their nuclear posture in terms of accuracies, in terms of tonnages, in terms of silos. Now, they are very clearly focusing on two kinds of systems. One is a kind of tactical operational system for the subcontinent, for Guam, for the region, really. And one is a nuclear, strategic kind of nuclear system which threatens the American mainland. And because they have, strengthened everything, as I said, tonnages, accuracies, missilery, the Americans are revisiting their nuclear posture. And as we have seen, nuclear deterrence matters. Look at how Putin, on many occasions, successfully waved the nuclear rattle in Ukraine, as recent as that. So nuclear deterrence matters. So I think we need to revisit our nuclear posture in terms of the approach, the philosophy, the equipping, and many things need to be revisited. Our nuclear posture is based on transparency. The Chinese nuclear thinking is based on ambiguity. For example, the Western Theater Commander has both conventional and nuclear weapons under him. They say, let the adversary wonder what is coming at us. We have got this transparent thing that, ballistic missiles for nuclear warheads, so on and so forth. I am an advocate of transiting to ambiguity. That's the way nuclear deterrence works. And I'm an advocate of revisiting our nuclear posture. Let me say a lot of good stuff has happened. I mean, we've seen those debates when we thought that a bomb in the basement was good enough. From that, we've got an overt nuclear posture, a strategic forces command, which is very potent, which is a deterrent. But given the way the nuclear dynamics are escalating globally in the manner in which they are becoming sophisticated, see, small things matter. This whole domain, they're a matter of detail. If you saw for a while, I think 2 to 3, 4 months back, the Europeans were threatening of escalating, with missile ranges and striking targets deeper in Russia. And suddenly Putin fires that Oreshnik, which is a non-nuclear weapon. It's described like that. I mean, it's so humongous in lethality and accuracy and the effect that it causes. It was fired into Ukraine, but the message went across all European capitals and they all backtracked. So nuclear deterrence has many layers, it has many steps. Where is our Oreshnik? We might ask. So it is not only conventional, not only nuclear, but conventional deterrence in the strategic nuclear realm that we need to look more closely at. Because when push comes to shove, these things matter. In fact, Hindol, what is most disconcerting in if you follow Ukraine and the current wars is that everything seems to matter. In Ukraine, you are having World War I French warfare, so manpower matters. There was this assumption, I also thought that technology can help you downsize. That's not the case. The Russians have lost 700,000 people. Deaths and casualties. Ukraine, 100,000. Russians are winning today because they are able to recreate manpower and the Ukrainians cannot. Their combat ages have gone up to 45, which means they are not a young military. One of the main reasons why you had this reverse in Kursk. The Russians have had to dig into troops from North Korea. 10,000, and I'm told another tranche of 10,000 on its way. Some say the Chinese troops are there, some rumors. So manpower matters. Cold War legacy instruments matter. Aircraft, artillery. But what has really changed is dronery. It has come in as a new arm, new service. You have to invest in dronery and leading edge technologies, AI and space, Starlinks. They have taken all war fighting to a new high. So now it's also national security has become an arena of high quality talent. Elon Musk and Alex Karp, and not mediocrity and mediocre scientists and so on and so forth. They will not deliver. So the game is getting increasingly complicated. And if I may make just one last point, now India, if I may just reference Swami Vivekananda, has entered the gymnasium of big power competition. We are the number 5 economy, soon to be number 3. Asian Power Index says we are the third most powerful country in the world. We need to step up our game in national security in terms of nuance, sophistication, long-term thinking. And here, 62, what is a good bar now to look at? 62, we sent our troops into battle ill-equipped, ill-clothed. 1990, General Malik, the then chief, says we will fight with what we have. Is it not time for this Vishwabandhu to say that we will send our soldiers, sailors, and airmen into battle? Firstly, deter. If deterrence fails, into battle with the technological capacities that they need to win. That should be the aspirational ideal. So not this chalta hai, we fight with what we have, but we will give you the capacities that you need to win. That was the hallmark of a true great power. So I think that is really the creative challenge before strategic thinkers like you, policy makers, how to make India strong in that sense. Not a military that jackboots around the world, but a calibrated, technologically enabled instrument of force that deters, and that when it war fights to win. Now, that is a real complicated challenge, and therefore this year is critical. When the Prime Minister and the Raksha Mantri say that this is the year of defense reforms, they are signaling political intent to broaden, deepen, and accelerate those reforms in all these areas. And if the bureaucratic leadership of the civil, military, technological, administrative, and financial leaderships, the bureaucracies can respond to this with wisdom and alacrity, India will be in a very fine place. But we really have to sense this opportunity to reform, to rise to the challenge. In that sense, India is in a very critical space. Let me give you one metric. Which look at R&D. The Americans spend $975 billion in R&D. $700 billion comes from the private sector. The Chinese are spending some $700 billion. We are not even spending $40 billion. So is the future not obvious unless we course correct? The Prime Minister says Anusandhan, which is innovation and R&D, and it has to come from everybody, also the private sector. So if India is to become strong in this Vikasit Bharat, the Vishwabandhu, many levers of our statecraft are in need of, urgent correction, if not transformation.
I couldn't agree more with you, General. For many, many years, a younger generation researching all of this, like me, have argued, obviously, again, to be called hawkish, that one of the big holes in our public discourse is a complete lack, as far as we see it, lack of real thinking on sovereignty. It's almost like we take our cartographic, self for granted. Oh, our borders will always remain this way. This is how it has always been, and so on and so forth. And that is astonishing, because we are only 77 years away from the time when our borders dramatically changed. And how can a country which has in living memory such experience be so callous about our sovereignty is astonishing. Of course, when I was in college, we were told by our thinkers, so to speak, that India doesn't need to be strong; it needs to be supple. Now, I've never understood what that means, but I completely agree with you. There is a big gaping hole in our public, our very public conversation about sovereignty. We take our sovereignty for granted. So perhaps that can be my last question to you. Why do you think that's true?
I mean, it is a consequence of being ill-informed. It is a consequence of being strategically illiterate. I mean, why should it be supple or strong? Why can't it be strong and supple? I mean, why are there contradictions? I don't understand. You know, this myth that has been spread that India is only a land of spiritual thinkers, it's not true. We've had some very hard-nosed realists, from Chanakya to Swami Vivekananda to Subhash Chandra Bose. Why have we de-emphasized the hard power element is the mystery. For example, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is a great idea. But Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam needs to be supplemented by the worldview of Swami Vivekananda, who warns you that the world at the end of the day is a gymnasium where nations come to make themselves strong. And Guru Tegh Bahadur, I think, says, Bal hoye, bandhan chute, sab kuch lage ho paaye. He's saying, you know, when strength accrues, shackles snap. Every move of yours seems a stratagem. This is what the Chinese have done. Now, when they make any move, the world wonders. But they have invest in power and capacity. Let me give you, two striking examples. Before that, Hindol being called a hawk is actually a badge of honor in India.
No, I think of it from in Guru Gobind Singh's terms, right? That even sparrows like us can be taught to fight hawks, as it were. You know.
So even
Uh,
I am called a hawk, though I try to be as reasoned as possible. And now let me give you this. This is a striking example of what power does. 1950, Mao is waiting to cross the Taiwan Strait. It's just 100 miles off. Taiwan is not very strong. He thinks he'll do it in 48 to 96 hours. And the Americans send the Seventh Fleet. Mao is forced to back off. 58, another attempt is made. This time, the Americans, in their hubris, threaten nuclear weapons, which leads to, the Chinese testing their nuclear weapons a little later in Lucknow, I think, if I'm not mistaken. 1995, another crisis erupts in Taiwan. This time, Bill Clinton sends 2 aircraft carriers. So the Chinese say, all right, enough is enough. Now we will do A2AD. They invest in this instrument of long-range precision, which is their rocket force, which is a very formidable force. It's aspirationally linking sensors and shooters over 7 domains: drones, missiles, everything. And strategic support force, which is nothing but AI enablement of the Chinese military. Now you must give it to the Chinese. They're the first military in the world to think on such a massive scale. AI enablement के लिए separate services raised. None of the lazy West was thinking about it, nor India. So today what do you have? What does Admiral Paparo say? He says, no, I can't send my aircraft carriers, forget the first, even to the second island chain. All that I will offer is Hellscape, autonomous systems. He's also, as I said recently, he said, see what the Chinese are doing. They're just increasing their exercises in scale, in manner, blockades. And they were just telling the Chinese, now look at our capacities, see the wisdom, and retreat to your corner of the Pacific. This is exactly what Biden was told by Xi in California the year before last. Without war fighting, through capacity, they are signaling, see reason and retreat. And the Trump administration is seeing it. Colby is seeing it. This is what happens when you create power, capacity. You might not have to use it. If you ask me, my hunch is that the Americans will not intervene in that. It is
right.
not an existential threat to the Americans.
Yes.
And there was a time when they intervened with impunity. And what it will do in the larger sense, once the Chinese, break out of the first and second island chain, they have this 400-ship navy. This navy is going to manifest in the IOR. It already is. That is the way power manifests. So we have to, play this long game in national security with wisdom. We cannot afford to be ill-informed and, if I may use the word, even illiterate. I've quoted to you the wisdom of Chanakya, Subhash Chandra Bose, Swami Vivekananda. So this is pretty ill-informed stuff. If it makes the argument that you can either be supple or strong, why can't you be strong and supple? That was the Indian wisdom. That has always been the Indian wisdom. And we are, in fact, in my younger years, you're right, this was parroted as unique Indian exceptionalism, which is nothing but a pack of nonsense. It is absolute distortion. National security is a force for public good. It is synonymous with prosperity. Without being strong, you cannot be prosperous. It is not an either or argument. And that is why on this issue, I'm a big fan of the current government, because it has really, more than the CDS DMA in Hindol, what happened was in appointing the CDS DMA, it signaled to the military that you are now into policy making, your voice will be heard. Now you please, we have given you a CDS who will try to change to the national security system, which is proving to be rather difficult. But that is the wisdom of, this government, which I think is very right. And we really need to beef up our national security, as I said, not to jackboot around the world, but a calibrated technological instrument which will intervene only when our national interests so dictate. And this is really what the Trump world is seeing, how economics, national security, hard power matters, and which people in Europe, many in India, refuse to just see the wisdom of it. I don't know for what reason. I cannot fathom.
As always, it's been a fascinating conversation, General. Thanks very much for your time. Really appreciate you taking off time to talk to me about all these issues. No doubt, as these things progress, we'll have many more opportunities to discuss them with you. Thanks very much for today. Thanks very much for your time. Appreciate it, General.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure being with you and your viewers. Thanks a lot. And happy Holi belated to you and to your viewers.
To you too, sir, and to your whole family.
Thank you. Thanks.